Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. It's another away trip for Norwich City this weekend when they travel to Pride Park to face Derby County in their 7th game of the Championship season. They'll hope to improve on a 1-0 loss to Swansea last time they were on the road, but they'll have the confidence of a 4-1 win over Watford. The Rams won't make it easy, however, having been unbeaten at home since February, and Norwich have a few different tactical tasks to get around going into this game. You know the drill on Tactics Board. First of all, I'll take you through the starting 11 that I think Johannes Torup will choose for the game. Then we'll take a look at some of Derby's strengths and weaknesses and how Norwich will have to adapt to those and try to exploit some of those weaknesses. And then we'll come on to a more topical element. And this week we're going to discuss how to get more midfielders on the score sheet, because after Gabriel Sara and Jonathan Rowe departing, there is a bit of a hole in the goals and assists department. So Norwich need a few of those players to step up. Marcelino Nunez was an example of that in the win over the Hornets, and we're going to be discussing how Norwich can make that happen time and again this season. But without further ado, I'm going to start with that starting lineup. So here it is. So I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Kellen Fisher at right back, Shane Duffy and Jose Cordoba in the centre of defence, with Callum Doyle at left back, Kenny McLean, Marcelino Nunez and Oscar Schwartau in midfield, Ante Cianat on the right, Borja Sainz on the left and Josh Sargent on his own up front. And I think there are a couple of areas there that are worthy of discussion. One of them is right back, and after last week, that was certainly not what I was expecting. I went for Jack Stacey, didn't even discuss it, and it didn't feel like a situation that was necessarily ripe for debate at that point, even though it felt like Fisher was pushing and was maybe more well suited to Torup's style of play. But at 11:30 last Saturday, we all learned that Torup had taken a risk, that he'd gone for a change in that position, and it certainly paid off. Fisher's performance against Watford, excellent. He really fit into the tactical system very well. Individually, he looked good as well, physically, technically, in terms of positioning, and he didn't really look like a 20-year-old making just his 4th Championship start. But of course, he was rewarded earlier this week with a contract, I think very well deserved based on those performances and the fact that he fits so well into Norwich's overall sort of strategy and system, and the youth pipeline that Ben Napper wants to develop, the ability to improve young players and then sell them on for big fees. You can see Fisher fitting into that, and he definitely looks like he's going to be one of the next to kick on and really reach that next level in a Norwich shirt. But tactically, it also gives them a bit more balance. It makes Torup's system look a bit more like it always has at Nordsjælland, with that slightly more technical fullback setup and the ability to invert on either side. I thought Fisher did that effectively a few times against Watford, maybe less than Callum Doyle did, but he looked capable of both staying out wide and going inside. And he also allowed Ante Cianat in front of him a little bit of freedom and a little bit more space in those attacking areas that maybe Stacey a lot of the time would take up. So tactically, one that very much works out, and you'd expect Torup to go the same way against Derby. And the other area that I wanted to discuss is midfield, and it's worth saying at this point that this is being recorded and probably a lot of you will be watching this before Johannes Torup's pre-Derby press conference. He'll of course tell us and the rest of the media at that point whether Anis Ben Slimani is fit for tomorrow's game, because that does feel like quite a key part of his selection. Of course, the midfield worked very well against Watford, but what we talked about on Tactics Board was the fact that Norwich play with a 3 in midfield, Watford played with a 2, and I thought that numerical advantage was a real big part of it. Norwich were able to play around that midfield rather than getting into a physical battle with them. And that might be a slightly different situation against Derby, who play with a 4-3-3, who also have a heavier presence in midfield and will want to make it a more physical battle. And with the numbers that they have in there, it should be easier for them to get closer to the Norwich players, to make it more physical, to make it more one-on-one and more of a battle. And you wonder, when you think about those elements, whether somebody with a slightly more physical profile would help Norwich. Of course, everyone saw the strengths that Slimani had against Coventry, and if he is fit, I think it provides Torp with a bit of a dilemma, because everyone was talking about the fact that Norwich had reached their best 11 against Watford, that it looked very well balanced, that it looked like the sort of 11 that we all expected from Torp when he first arrived at the club. But then you look at how much people like Slimani and how well suited he could be to a battle with this more physical Derby midfield, including former Norwich Academy man Ebu Adams. And you do wonder whether Torp has a bit of a decision to make. Of course, even if he is fit, it will have been a while since his last game, given there was the international break after Coventry, and then he's had a couple of weeks recovering from injury as well. So that's certainly another element to think about. But I wonder if there will just be a little nagging question in Torp's mind as to whether tactically he needs to make that change, because Derby are quite a different proposition to what Watford were, especially when you go away to Pride Park, where they have such an excellent home record, compared to at Carrow Road, where you're expected to control the game. You've got your own crowd behind you, and some of those tactical elements were going in their favour. You wonder if Torp will be tempted into a change. I've gone for Schwartau because I think it would be very harsh to drop any of those midfielders based on their performances last weekend. But I could see tactically why Slimani would be another consideration. And I think if he is fit, then it's definitely something Torp is going to have to think about. Coming on to Derby, and I think Norwich fans will know very well, having come up against his Rotherham United sides a number of times, what Paul Warne's football looks like. He's gone into Derby and he's used that tried and tested formula that got him success with the Millers. It's got Derby to 10th in the Championship after their first 6 games. They've won all of their games at Pride Park so far, and they are looking very, very good at home at least. And I think you look at their squad of players, and to be honest, it does feel like he's getting a lot out of them, and that this style of play is very well optimised to improve the output of his team. That squad, although you might assume it would be very comfortable in the Championship, given the size of club that they are at this level and the size of club that they were certainly in League One, the squad is still a little bit rough and ready, and it is still, I think, quite a lot weaker than Norwich's, technically, definitely. So that's where Derby will try to make up the difference, is with strength and physicality and well-drilled tactical discipline. They will play long balls, they will chuck crosses in the box, they will try to make the most of set pieces, and most likely they will drop fairly deep in their defence and almost give Norwich the task to break them down, because you chuck crosses in the box, you try and go a little bit more direct, albeit that probably isn't what Norwich want to do anyway. And they have those physical players in there. They've got the likes of Nat Phillips from Liverpool, Aaron Cashin, who I'm sure Norwich fans will be aware of after he was linked with the club a couple of years ago as well. They've got those strong aerial presences in there who can combat those threats. So a lot of Norwich's task is to play quickly, again, as it was against Watford, and to get around them before they manage to make it a physical battle and a one-on-one thing where strength is the winner, because ultimately that isn't where Norwich's strengths lie. So if they can make it a technical passing match where they are looking to probe and looking to open gaps and create chances that way, then Norwich have a real significant chance there. There will be players who need to be alert. Of course, the fullback's job against Derby will be to get out and stop those crosses as much as possible, but ultimately some will slip through the net, so Duffy and Cordoba will need to be as strong aerially as their defensive counterparts at the other end. We have seen both of their strengths, particularly Shane Duffy, in the air, so that shouldn't be something Norwich are especially worried about. But also they'll need to be looking behind them, because Derby will try to go long, they'll try to counter-attack directly, and they've got direct attacking, pacey, physical, athletic players like Nathaniel Mendes-Lang on the left-hand side. They've got Caden Jackson, of course, the former Ipswich man, on the right-hand side, who are both capable of running in behind and causing problems for defenders with their pace and with their movement. So Duffy and Cordoba will both need to be switched on, assuming it's that pair that starts in the centre of defence, of course. And I think there were positive signs for that in the Watford game. Of course, Watford have a good few players themselves who want to run in behind, but we saw Cordoba's strengths. That's what has been described before he wore a Norwich shirt in the Championship as a starter. Anyway, he made his first start in the Championship last week, and we saw all of those attributes. He does have that strong running style. He does have the physicality to lever attackers off the ball when they're trying to get in behind, and that could be very important against Derby as they try to counter and as they try to launch long balls in behind plenty of the time. But Norwich, like many possession-based sides, will just have to break down these sides. They'll have to make sure that their movement is top-notch and that their combinations are very good. That is an area they've struggled with at times, but it's the sort of setup that Torup will thrive on playing against and will look forward to trying to break down. It is a bit of a challenge, especially when you consider some of the creative problems that Norwich have had in the weeks going into Watford, and also Derby's strong record at home. They haven't conceded at Pride Park in the Championship yet this season. So that is probably the element that Norwich might struggle with most. However, they do have the players to unlock that defence, and you would say if they can make it a footballing game, then they've definitely got the advantage there and they should have the upper hand. Now, to finish with, I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about how Norwich can get more of their midfielders on the score sheet, because as I mentioned earlier, they've lost Jonathan Rowe, they've lost Gabriel Sara, they've lost, I think, more than 25 goals in the process this summer, and Josh Sargent, unfortunately, as good a striker as he is, probably isn't going to step up and score 40 this season. So Norwich need to find goals from elsewhere. Of course, there's been plenty of discussion around Borja Sainz, and to be fair to him, he's already got 3 in the Championship, half of his total for last season already, and it looks like he's upping those numbers. But now it's about where else Norwich can get goals from, and maybe the midfield is next in line for that. Of course, Marcelino Nunez's goal against Watford was the prime example of that. He made a perfectly timed run, got into the edge of the box, and then finished very well with one touch. Those are the sorts of things you want to see very regularly, not only from him, but also from his midfield colleagues. And it's the sort of thing that maybe we haven't seen from them in recent seasons, Gabriel Sara aside, of course, and we know what a supreme talent he was. But you don't need to have that level of supreme talent just to be scoring goals as a midfielder. A lot of it is about timing and movement and tactics and knowing where to be at the right time. And I think it's something Kenny McLean has spoken about a few times, actually, that he wants to get on the score sheet more. It's definitely something that those midfielders will be thinking about and trying to do. So it's about now how Norwich can try to help themselves do that, and how tactically they can get the best out of them, out of their midfielders, in those attacking positions. Now, I think one of the solutions to that is Oscar Schwartau. One of his main strengths is box crashing, as the modern term is, or getting to the box at the right time and scoring goals on the edge of the box, maybe when things have cleared a little bit in front of him and there's a bit of space opened up around that penalty spot or the edge of the box. It's a strength that Torup talked about even before he was signed, actually, and I think the timing of those runs was something you saw as a significant strength against Watford. In that midfield role where he's facing the goal more often, he definitely finds himself in those goal-scoring positions more often. And I actually thought in the first half especially that he got in some good positions but wasn't quite found, or maybe there was a better option at times. And it feels like it's only a matter of time before he's scoring goals from that area. But when it comes to Nunez and some of those other colleagues, I can see why McLean, maybe it's hard for him to cover that level of ground when he is the deeper player. But you look at Nunez's heat map, and he is so deep in the midfield, he's so deep on the pitch that it is a lot of ground for him to cover. Maybe a lot of it is to do with physicality and learning to run those distances in the required time. But he showed that he could do it against Watford. So now it's about producing that consistency, about arriving in the box when you should be arriving in the box, covering that ground from deep where he's needed in the Torup system to be an option for the centre-backs as they're looking to pass out, and then having the athleticism to get from there to the edge of the box and contribute when the ball breaks. But also it's to do with Josh Sargent and the role that he can play. I think he is quite good at making that first run and dashing across the first defender to take people with him there. But there have been situations where maybe he's thinking mainly about how he can get on the score sheet and where the best position is for him to receive the ball. In fact, for that Nunez goal, there was almost a mix-up between those two players because they both saw that Callum Doyle's best option was a cutback. Sargent dropped deep to try and receive that ball, and they were almost falling over each other as the ball went into the net. And that's something that Sargent needs to be producing on a really regular basis. Of course, he needs to be backed up by his midfield teammates, otherwise it would just be a waste of a good position if he isn't in the best position to finish those chances. But if there can be an improvement in the relationship between him and some of those midfielders and they can have a better understanding, then he'll know where to run to create space for those behind him and vice versa. And I think that's another way that Norwich can get more out of their midfielders. But it's something that Torup's spoken about. It's something that he certainly wants to improve on, and I'm sure it's something he's worked on already. He would love to see more goals from his midfielders at Pride Park this weekend. I'm sure he'd love to see goals from pretty much anywhere in his team this weekend. Hopefully Norwich can upset the odds as far as that unbeaten home record for Derby. They can be the first team to win at that stadium since February earlier this year, and everyone will be feeling as positive as they did after that Watford win. Of course, we'll have the game covered across our channels, so go to pinken.com/subscribe and you'll have access to absolutely all of it. I'm sure I'll see some of you there. Thank you for joining me on Tactics Board, and I'll see you again very soon.